Flightcast, a place where opinions aren't right or wrong, and where we can agree or disagree about movies, TV, and other assorted media because it's all subjective. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me. And before I launch into another episode filled with talk about DC Studios and James Gunn, because we are T-minus 17 days away from the release of Superman, I did want to just say this really quickly. And I know nobody has said this. I know no one has sent any emails in about this. I know that this isn't a sentiment that necessarily has been echoed by anybody listening to this show on a semi-regular basis or regular basis for that matter. But I have been seeing on threads and on social media a sentiment from people regarding the current world that we live in, and the sanctimonious people are standing on a soapbox here and there in corners and pockets of social media telling content creators and podcasters like yours truly and maybe a number of you, hey, there's way more important stuff going on in the world. You need to knock this shit off and start focusing on the real problems. Yes, that sanctimonious nonsense is happening. And don't get me wrong, it is completely sanctimonious nonsense. And my position on that is pretty clear. I actually said this the other day. I posted this on Threads. I said the current regime in the U.S. government, if you will, wants you scared, broken, and ready to give up. The shock and awe of the past 6 months, plus their unwillingness to obey the law, is meant to drain your hope, so that their ultimate aggression will overtake you without resistance. That's why we're still talking about movies, TV, and other assorted media, because life isn't hopeless, the world is still spinning, and we will be damned if we let fascism for dummies destroy our art or the will to live for it. And I posted that with a picture of Jon Snow unsheathing his sword against the armies coming at him. You know the gif, you've seen it, with the people on horseback coming for him, because that's how I feel. And I feel like that's how a lot of you feel. And again, I'm not really posting this or saying this rather here for anybody's benefit. It's just, I felt the need to say it officially. I realize that there's a lot of horrible shit going on right now. I realize that people's hopes are as bleak as they possibly could be at this point in time. I get it. I'm not telling anybody how to behave necessarily. I'm not telling anybody not to freak out. I'm not telling anybody to calm down with respect to what's happening in the real world. What I am saying is that those of us that don't want to be depressed every damn day, those of us that don't want to step out on a ledge every time we see an absolutely bullshit headline from anywhere at this point, those of us that actually do still wish to enjoy life for however long we have left to live it, because none of us actually know, we're going to keep talking about the shit that we enjoy. We're going to keep enjoying the shit that we enjoy. And we're looking forward to Superman. And you know what? More than, I've heard a few people say this, I've heard, I think, John and a couple others question this or wonder this, of like, the way the world is right now. Actually, I've seen people post this on the official Superman account whenever they post stuff on Threads. We need, like, some hope right now, right? We need, it'll be interesting to see how the audience reacts to Superman from that perspective. For 2 hours, you want to walk into a theater, turn the brain off, literally, and just focus on the goodness of an individual that is a superhero that is trying to do the right thing, right? And granted, that's precisely what he's done in all of his movies, whether he was played by Christopher Reeve or Brandon Routh, or whether he was played by Henry Cavill, and certainly when he will be played by David Corenswet in 17 days, we will see that as well. But it will be interesting to see how the audience, dealing with all of the bullshittery of the world right now, gravitates towards that, if they do, right? Is it a case where people are racing to the theater like, okay, we need something. We need some hope. We need some happiness. We need something to build ourselves on. So let's go watch this movie and dream of a world where, as crazy as it might be, perhaps things are better because they have a Superman. It'll be interesting to see if that actually does help the film in any way. But yeah, that's just kind of an official disclaimer, I guess, for anybody that is listening to this show or is wondering how in the hell is he doing a show at this point in time with everything happening. And I don't mince words on political topics. John brought up some political stuff in the last Flight Chat episode. I don't shy away from it. You guys know I don't shy away from it. This isn't a political show, but I don't hide where I sit politically. And a lot of you, I think, are in the same boat with me because we agree on things on social media, and we've had conversations before, and we've had that dialogue, and we have a lot of shared views, if you will, with respect to this show. And that's kind of the case. Anybody that listens to this show, you can't necessarily be a particular way and listen to my show, because I make it very clear whether or not you are welcome here or whether you are not welcome here. And not everybody is welcome in your home. Watch Sinners. That movie teaches us more than anything who is welcome in your home and who is not. And it ain't everybody. It damn sure is not everybody. As open-minded as you wish to be in the world that we live in, and I'm not saying we shouldn't be, you still got to be careful. Can't invite everybody in. Can't let everybody in your damn house. Sometimes vampires want to come and suck your soul right out of your neck in that regard. And never mind that. Plenty of vampires out there. They don't just suck blood. Energy vampires, aura vampires, chi vampires, and a lot of them live on social media, and a lot of them aren't even real. Bots and bot farms and a row of cell phones connected to a computer typing the same bullshit just to piss us off, just to get us into a tizzy, just to make us rageful and vengeful and go after the people that don't need to be gone after, right? Instead of focusing our energy and efforts in a different direction. So yeah, they're not going to tear me down. They're not going to disillusion me. I'm going to keep talking about movies, TV, and other assorted media. And not that I needed to tell you that, but I guess I needed to say that out loud, just to make it official. So there we have it. All right. Now, before getting into my diatribe for another week about DC Studios and the awesomeness and the building hype of Superman, I want to remind everybody that this show and my other shows can be found at theflightcast.com or wherever you get your podcast, whether it is Apple Podcasts, whether it is the Flightcast YouTube page, whether it is Spotify, whether it is Pandora, or whatever podcatcher you use, you can find the Flightcast. And you can listen to this show on Tuesdays. You can listen to Flightbox on Thursdays, which will be covering Ironheart. The first 3 episodes of Ironheart I will talk about on Flightbox. And no, I shan't review bomb it. And I shan't be giving any energy or any attention to the review bombers that are already trying to tell us how woke and too brown and too female that show is. No, all those people can take long walks off short cliffs, and they most certainly are not welcome on this show. But I will be talking about Ironheart on Flightbox this Thursday, and then, of course, we'll have Flight Chat this weekend for some more feedback. John's already sent a pair of emails and a pair of longer emails. I'm sure he'll send some more by the time the week is out, and we'll see who else joins the feedback circle for another week as we get closer and closer to the release date of Superman. That's the big one. And we can't forget Jurassic Park, or Jurassic World, rather. Jurassic World Rebirth, that's also out on July 2nd. I probably want to see that. I gotta find some time to watch Dominion. I do. And this is a great segue to talk about patreon.com/theflightcast, because when I finally watch Dominion, when I rewatch Fallen Kingdom, and when I watch Dominion, I need to post flight reviews of those on Patreon. You know what else I need to do? I need to read Superman for All Seasons, and I need to read All-Star Superman, the 2 books that inspired James Gunn's Superman film that we're seeing in 17 days, and I need to do flight report episodes on that, and I need to post those on Patreon. I also need to finally get into my animated obsession, my animated collecting obsession, if you will, that I've been meaning to get to for the last couple of months. Truthfully, there is some animation that I have been collecting that I need to watch for the first time, and I gotta watch a good amount of it before July 8th. Yes, before the day that I see Superman, because there's another thing releasing on July 8th that I really need to talk about, that I really want to talk about, and it might be really emotional to talk about depending on what people have told me about it. But I gotta get into it, so I gotta do some flight review episodes of that on Patreon. But right now on patreon.com/theflightcast, there's a ton of bonus content, almost 200 pieces of bonus content, episodes of Flight Report, Flight Review, Flight Box, Flight Speed, the show that I do in the car on the way home from work on occasion here and there, and Flight Chat episodes. There's a ton of bonus content there. For those of you that are members of Patreon, thank you so much for being a loyal member of patreon.com/theflightcast. Hope that you've been enjoying the bonus content. And if anybody else is interested, you can sign up to be a flight officer and enjoy all the bonus content that is there. I've got reviews of Civil War, Brand New Day, the comic series, Death of the Family, the comic series, Batman Year One, Batgirl. I read the Burnside stuff when we thought the Batgirl movie was happening. Yeah, that was way back when, but you know, it is what it is. But I've got those episodes. I've got reviews of other movies as well available there. Bonus stuff, bonus content. So if you're interested, go ahead and sign up to be a flight officer and take advantage of all that's there, and also stay tuned for the new stuff that's coming. And also to those of you, once again, that are subscribed, thank you so much for your loyal support to patreon.com/theflightcast. All right, so the press tour for Superman is rolling. They were in Rio recently, and they were down in South America. They showed a group of fans the first 30 minutes of the film, and they weren't allowed to review it, but they were allowed to talk about their reactions, how they felt about it. And so far, I mean, listen, I've talked before about how the marketing for DC Studios has been a welcome and refreshing change of pace with respect to DC marketing, and that continues. I mean, the stuff that they're posting, and I know that we're getting to that point where it's like, you're posting too many clips, you're showing us half the movie. No, they're not. They absolutely are not. Unless you're like trying to piece everything together and put things together like a puzzle. Like, hey, where does this happen? Where does that happen? No, it's not like that way at all. But I commend them so much for their interactions here. They got Cornswet and Rachel Brosnahan doing the compliment game, and Cornswet has no idea how to play it. He's just like this corny, really nice guy. They're doing the press tours. They're bringing the dogs with the Superman capes. They're talking to all the fans. There's this one kid dressed in a Superman outfit. His name apparently is actually Kal-El, and they brought him up on stage and took pictures with him, and they were chanting his name. And yeah, no, it's awesome. And I know that there's some people out there that are like, well, why is James Gunn front and center for all of it? Well, did we ask the same question about Ryan Coogler when he was front and center for like Sinners Press? It's the same thing. It's the exact same thing. No, it's not an indie film, but James Gunn is putting everything on the line here, and he doesn't like that necessarily. He doesn't like that designation, but like, this is his work. He's putting his stamp on this. This is his energy. This is his project. This is his baby, right? The DCU is his baby. And this is the jumping off point for it. This is the starting point. Why wouldn't he put himself front and center? I mean, he is a marketable individual. He is. If we thought that Zack Snyder was a marketable individual, why can't we think the same about James Gunn? Of course we can. They both are in their own right. So I have no issue with James Gunn being front and center with all this stuff as a director. I mean, it's what directors do. James Gunn is more jovial about it with his cast and crew. So what? Everything, I mean, all the stuff they've done so far with Superman marketing, I think, has been phenomenal. I really do. And, if we could just gauge how this film is going to do based off of that, I'd say, man, this is going to be like gangbusters. But it's still a crapshoot at the end of the day. And as much as I could tell you that, seeing all this outreach and seeing all these fans and everybody down in Rio and Brazil and whatnot, just pouring out all these emotions and being excited for the film, right? All the people that saw the 30-minute preview, first 30 minutes of the film, all them being excited. As much as I can tell you that my theater, even though it is not 100% sold out, it's down to its last few seats in the front row and this is for the Amazon Advance showings, by the way, on July 8th. As much as I can tell you that in this area, people are definitely buying tickets to see this thing early and on opening weekend, we still got to wait and see what it does. And we got to see whose predictions are right. Is it Hollywood Reporter saying 135 million, or is it Deadline lowballing it by another 10 to 20 million dollars? We don't know. Who knows? And I'm sure that there are people, I've seen you guys react to it. I've seen some of you say you think it's more on the higher end. I've seen some of you say you think it's more on the lower end. I've heard the criticisms, right? We've talked about it a little bit. Sam Otten, he rejoined the feedback circle the other day. He talked about some things that he doesn't necessarily care for that he's going to see in the Superman movie, but he's not going to let it ruin the movie for him, and he's probably still going to like the film. It's just not going to be completely his speed, and I get that. I totally understand that. But this is one of those cases where I feel like with this film, more than anything, at this point in time, this really kind of, the rubber meets the road as far as like how much of a DC fan or how much success we want to see DC have on the big screen. Because I think that there is a perception that a lot of us as fans, we only want what we personally want. And we don't have the capacity necessarily, by and large, to open our minds and say, well, I don't necessarily care for this, but I hope it succeeds because I want to see DC succeed. And I've seen a number of you say that. I've seen Anthony say it. I've seen Wally you say it. Myself, I've seen Jared, I've seen a number of you say it, right? And I feel like most of us feel that way with respect to this. Even if we don't necessarily get the film that we want, even if we can't sit there at the end of the day and say that we think it's better than Man of Steel, we still want it to do well. We still want it to succeed because we still want DC to succeed, because then there's the promise of what we could have down the road. And that's a great segue into this other interview that I was going to talk about on Patreon that came out a couple of days after I did the breakdown of James Gunn's interview with Rolling Stone. He did another interview with Entertainment Weekly, and that one had some more information with respect to DC Studios and the future of DC Studios projects, if you will. So, without further ado, I will break it down here now. This is an Entertainment Weekly exclusive interview by Nick Romano called DC's Man of Tomorrow, James Gunn on Superman, Gods and Monsters, and What's Next. The writer-director of this summer's Superman and the co-head of DC Studios offers a peek behind the curtain. And yeah, like I said, Nick Romano wrote this, so he's the one conducting this interview. This is a different interview. There are different questions. There's a different angle with this particular piece than there was with the Rolling Stone one. That one was a lot more introspective and a lot more like in depth with James Gunn as a person. This one is definitely more centered around the DC Studios future and the business aspect, if you will. So let's dive headfirst into this, shall we? Nick Romano starts off by saying, James Gunn is a man with a plan. After making the Guardians of the Galaxy movies for Marvel, he's spearheading a new age for DC as a co-head of the studio with his longtime collaborator Peter Safran. Superman, coming to theaters July 11th, is the first big screen event in this Envision-connected universe of movies and TV series. Entertainment Weekly spoke with Gunn on May 22nd for an in-depth cover story on Superman, starring David Corenswet as the Man of Steel, Rachel Brosnahan as Lois Lane, and Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor. Below are excerpts from that conversation, most of which are not included in that feature piece. Oh, well, how about that? Online exclusives. From his active social media presence to upcoming projects such as HBO's Lanterns and what filmmaker Matt Reeves has planned for The Batman Part 2, to titles coming even further down the line, Gunn previews the future of the DCU. And by the way, a lot of that is why I want to break this down, because the regurgitators, of course, have been talking about this for the last week, and people have offered their 2 cents and their thoughts, and they've even responded and talked to Gunn about this, and there's a few of his responses on threads that I also want to bring up at some point in this particular episode. But yeah, this is to give my thoughts on what everybody else has been talking about with respect to the news and the revelations coming out of this. So, Entertainment Weekly's first question for James Gunn is, you're one of the very few filmmakers, probably the only head of a studio, who is so active on social media. When did you decide that you really wanted that sort of direct line of communication between DC fans? Gunn says, I think that just happened naturally. In fact, I'm much less active than I ever have been on social media, just mostly because I'm busy, but also because it is just too much. I've been on social media really since MySpace took off, and I've had a lot of interaction with fans online since that time. I'm from Manchester, Missouri. I didn't know anyone in Hollywood, he says. Those few moments where I was young and I was able to interact with somebody who was a part of this, what I thought of as a magical and distant faraway world of Hollywood or entertainment media in general, whether it was a local DJ or Joe Strummer, who I met when I was a kid, or Pierce Brosnan, who I met when I was a kid, really meant a lot. He says, I've always wanted to give that same thing back in terms of realizing these people who are buying tickets to my movies and making fan art and all these things are just people, and to treat them with the respect that human beings deserve and creating that type of mutual respect with fans that they deserve. So right there, that tells you also why he's big on all these press tours and why he's, doing all these interviews and why he's front and center along with his actors in a way that perhaps we don't see so much. Right, so for people, and I know a few of you, not a ton of you, but a few of you have been critical of James Gunn being in so much marketing and being in posters and being on covers of comics and all that. And it's like, why is he making it so much about himself? And I don't know that any of you have necessarily said that. But I know there are people out there that do think there's some narcissism and that he is making it all about himself. And while I think there's a streak of narcissism in all of us, truthfully, which is why a lot of us, we're on social media to whore ourselves out attention-wise, seriously. If we all just admitted that on some level, right? I mean, yes, it's for connection, and yes, it's for, to have dialogue, but it's also to see who else, agrees with us, to attract attention, to be like, hey, who agrees with what I said? Hopefully you agree with what I believe, and we can all commiserate together in that regard, right? And it's the same thing that he's talking about here in terms of wanting to understand the realism of how real fans are, how real people are, and how they respond to that. And to me, we can go back and forth on whether or not his social media presence is useful, whether or not it's helpful. I will never say it isn't. I mean, there are times where he, shouldn't talk to trolls, right? He shouldn't give trolls the light of day. He shouldn't amplify anything that they say. But as far as being on social media, specifically to debunk bullshit, because for the last 9 years we've been fed a ton of bullshit and rumors, mostly about DC, but certainly about Marvel as well, right? When Scooper Madness rears its ugly, grifting head to try and twist us into knots over some nonsense, it's important for him to be there to kill that shit. He has continued to kill shit, and I appreciate that. This is a lie, that's a lie, yes, thank you. If for no other reason, If that's the only reason he's on social media, then that is already a benefit. That's already a plus because it's part of that controlling the narrative that we've said DC Films need to do for years, and DC Studios is finally doing it. And this is part of how, with James Gunn being as active as he is on social media, right? Even when he's, in the middle of uh, business, doing the business and making movies and whatnot. But here we go. It goes into this next question. They say, I joke with my colleagues that part of my job these days is debunking a lot of the rumors that go around online. I have noticed quite frequently you tend to shoot those down in the moment. That's from Entertainment Weekly. And Gunn says, but now I've kind of quit it because it just happens so often. There are a couple of people, specifically, who have pretty large followings who just consistently put out false stories, he says. Just one after the other, 95% of the time. Maybe once out of every 20 times they say something that has some slight or partial basis in reality. And it gets to be old. I'm not sure some of those people that I'm not actually helping them in a certain way by debunking them because you're giving them traffic, which I always do, but I think they like it. So I mostly quit. He says, but every once in a while, there's a story that gets out of hand quickly that has the possibility of hurting someone's feelings. For instance, if there's a director we're talking to about a project and all of a sudden it comes out a story that so and so, another director who has nothing to do with anything, is doing this project, you want to kill that pretty quickly because it's not true. Same thing with actors or whomever. So if people's feelings are at stake and there's something that's getting out of hand, I'll shut it down. So right there, he's talking about Scooper Madness. He's talking about fools like Daniel RPK and The Rap and Disgrace and everybody, right? They could be in the middle of negotiations with a director on a particular project, a DCU film, and then one of these idiots in Scooper Madness circles will come out with a completely different piece, like, hey, so and so has been named to this, so and so is in talks, right? And yeah, you do have to squash that quickly because now that's affecting your negotiation for the actual film that you want to do. And if you want to extend the creative freedom for James Gunn and DC Studios for them to build their plan the way that they want to build it, then it's important for them to shoot this shit down so that it doesn't affect those negotiations. You want them to get the filmmakers and the writers that they are angling to get, that they intend to get, because you want their original vision to play out. At least you do if you believe in creative freedom. I know not everyone does. I feel like if you listen to this show, you do. But either way, yeah, that's a very important piece of it that I'm glad that he acknowledges, and I'm glad that he absolutely is taking a forefront on that because he's right. That kind of stuff does need to get squashed so that it doesn't affect the actual progress of DC Studios, creatively speaking. So, Entertainment Weekly's next question is, what is it like for you to do that being the head of a studio but also the director of a film like Superman? Are you able to compartmentalize? Basically, can he separate between being the head of DC Studios, the co-head, and the director of its right now most important film? And Gunn says, listen, a lot of my social networking is done by other people. It's always me. It's always my words, but a lot of times there's other people that are posting it. And a lot of other times other people are bringing me questions offline from online, and I'll answer them and send them those answers. But then every once in a while, I have a long flight or a long drive or somebody else is driving or something, and I get on threads and I answer questions. You can see when I'm actually doing that because it'll be like 5, 6 answers in a row about once every 3 weeks. It's been a little, I guess he's once every 3 weeks. I feel like it's happened a little bit more frequently than that, but yeah, sometimes when he gets a flurry of answers, and then you know when the flurry of answers happen because you watch all the other non-avatar having people and all the people that just want to get attention, all the attention whores converge on that thread and they start asking him, they start peppering him with questions. He gets peppered with questions no matter what he posts. He posts pictures of his dogs and cats on their birthdays, or when they're celebrating or lounging around the house, and here comes a question about Clayface, here comes a question about Brave and the Bold, here comes a question about, hey, are you going to cross over DC and Marvel? Yeah, all these inane questions to get him to give an answer because he has given a handful of answers, right? Look, I wasn't going to mention this, but I'll go ahead and bring this up. Once, a week or so ago, he liked what I said. He liked one of my posts. That is the most interaction that James Gunn has had with me because it was during that nonsense from the Snyder cultist that was posting that stuff on the Reddit about, review bombing the film, and if we can have our Superman, no one can, that kind of deal, right? And of course, when that came out, when that post was posted, when the screenshots flooded threads, plenty of people, multiple people tagged James Gunn and wanted him to be aware of it. Like, I think he needs to see, he should be aware of this, which like, that's so self-aggrandizing and ridiculous. Like, James Gunn has nothing to worry about from these clowns whatsoever. And these people like, oh, we're going to take it upon ourselves to warn him about bullshit. About morons. And I loved his response because one dude, Watch All Irish, I think that's what his name is, he says, James, please be aware of this disgusting behavior. So sick and tired of this rubbish. And Gunn's response was, LOL, I think we'll survive. I'm not sure the 8 people that listen to that guy, I'm going to go out on a limb and guess it's a guy, are going to impact the course of events. And I responded to that. I liked that comment, and I responded to him, and I said, "Thank you for understanding that most Snyder fans don't behave like that, and it's only an extreme vocal minority that would post such silliness. If ticket sales at my theater for July 8th are any indicator, then you have nothing to worry about." And I gave him a thumbs up. He liked that post. That's the one thing. He liked what I said. He's one of 15 people that liked that particular response. That's as much as I don't need him to respond to me. I didn't need him to give me a response. I don't fish for responses from James Gunn. Was legitimately thanking him because I do think that that's important, that he understands how small of a minority the Snyder cult actually is, and that the majority of us do not feel that way. And certainly, anybody that does feel that way is not in any type of mathematical position. They don't have the numbers to even make a dent into what's going to happen with Superman's box office whatsoever. So I appreciate that he's rational, unlike a lot of people who just love to lump us rational Snyder fans in with the cult and act like it's mostly the cult when it's not mostly the cult. Most people that enjoy Zack Snyder's films, the DC films, mind you, are not cultists at all. Not Snyder cultists whatsoever. But either way, moving on to the next question. Entertainment Weekly asks, what has it been like juggling your responsibilities as a co-head of DC Studios with your responsibilities of writing and directing Superman? He says, so the balance isn't between creative and business. The balance is between specific creative and macro creative. Peter Safran, he does all our meetings. He does all the business stuff. For me, it's about writing and directing, but it's also about shepherding other writers and directors. It's about trying to come up with other ideas for other shows, other movies that I give to other writers to take care of. So my job is all creative. Occasionally, there are other things that you need to do, of course, as any writer-director does, but mostly it's taking care of the creative storytelling across all platforms. That said, he says it's a little bit too much at times. I can't do everything. I've had to try and focus on what I can focus on, which has been part of my learning process over the past couple of years of having this job. If I try to do everything, it's too little of any one thing, so I need to really focus on certain pieces of what's happening. When I find somebody really terrific, he says, what I found with Damon Lindelof and Chris Mundy and Tom King, who are running Lanterns, I read the scripts, I give them notes, but then I let them go do their thing. I mean, I watch the dailies, make sure everything's going okay, and then I'll watch when we start getting the cuts in, which I think we're supposed to get next week or something. I'll start giving them notes on the specific cuts, whereas maybe I was a little bit more involved during the writing phase, for instance, of Supergirl, because that was something that was one of the first ideas I had when I came to work at DC. I really wanted to adapt Woman of Tomorrow, the Tom King book, so it depends on what's happening. And all that's fair. All that's completely fair, because I feel like a number of us have asked, well, is it too overwhelming? Is he taking on too much? And he acknowledges, yeah, sometimes it is a bit much and delegation is necessary. So one, it's great that he's acknowledging that, right? So this idea of, well, he's going to get too buried and, not be able to focus on the bigger picture because he's too worried about this movie, or his focus on the bigger picture will hurt this one movie that he's writing and directing, right? So there's that part of it. And then the other part, I like how he describes the delineation between what he does and what Peter Safran does, because it's what we were expecting when they were both named as co-heads. It's also what they, in earnest, maybe not so much in earnest, it's in name, like surface level, tried to do with DC Films back in 2016, right? This is the actual, putting into practice, structurally competent, at least to this point, version of what Jeff Johns and John Berg were supposed to do with DC Films, and neither one of them had any flipping clue what they were doing so far. With DC Studios being its own autonomous entity and the things that they've done with the marketing and whatnot, so far it seems much more competent and much more put together than what that was. So this is a stronger attempt, this is a better attempt, this is a more defined attempt at that particular situation where you have a producer that handles all the business stuff and another one that handles all the creative stuff. And we want Gunn focused on the creative. We do. We want that, right? Even if you're not a fan of James Gunn, you still want one of your producers focused on the creative, the other one focused on the business, and not trying to blend the two, because that's really where you start to get into problems in terms of what do you think works for a story compared to what do you think will get us more screen times in a theater, that type of deal, right? Like it makes more sense to do it this way. And so far, so good. We will find out in 17 days, as far as Superman is concerned, how effective that approach has been to this point. So then Entertainment Weekly asks, I picked up bits and pieces of this story here and there. How did you settle on Superman to be the first movie that you would write and direct in this new phase of DC? Gunn says all three things that are now coming out rather, were already in process before I took over at DC. I was already hired to write Superman. I was already working on Creature Commandos, and I already had a deal to do Peacemaker Season 2. The thing is that the priorities of what was up first changed. Because I was already writing Superman. He's one of the three biggest characters at DC, one of the most important characters in all of Warner Brothers' catalog, but was also really the figurehead of DC in a lot of ways because he's the first ever superhero. So it seemed like the right movie to do first. I feel like that answer makes sense, right, guys? I mean, look, we know it, he talks about the three biggest characters of DC. He knows who they are. He knows it's the Trinity, right? And we also know that with respect to popularity, we know who the most popular one is, and it's not Superman, right? That's not a slight at Superman or the fandom. It's just we know that Batman is the number one in terms of popularity, but Superman is the one that does kick everything off, that does get everything started. Once you establish Superman, it does change the parameters of how your universe operates, and then the rules kind of build out thematically from that point. You start with this particular being, and then you go out from there, and then you can define how your Batman works, you can define how your Wonder Woman works, you can define how your Justice League works if you go in that direction, right? So it makes sense. I feel like a lot of us have understood that over the years, that you got to get Superman's house in order to be able to do something like this. So then they ask, two characters that I still have a question mark over are the Hammer of Baravia and this Ultraman figure. Am I on the right track in assuming Ultraman is Luthor's attempt to recreate a Superman kind of figure? Am I really off? Gunn's answer was, it's close. Yeah, I think that's close. Ultraman is sort of Lex's thug and is pretty powerful, which, by the way, he did release, James Gunn did today. He released a new official still of Ultraman, and he looks a bit more disheveled, a little different than how we've seen him in these trailers and clips so far. But yeah, Ultraman. All right, confirmed in the film. And so then they asked, and in terms of the Hammer of Baravia, we get that shot of Eve Tessmacher, played by Sarah Sampaio, taking a selfie while that battle is going on. So it implies a Luthor Corps connection. Gunn says, yes, totally. Lex is connected to everything. There's nothing bad happening in Metropolis during this movie that doesn't have some connection to Lex Luthor. Yeah, that pretty much seems obvious. They ask, how much do you see Superman as a proof of concept for what big screen films in the DCU can look like? Gunn's answer is telling here. He says, I don't think of it like that at all. I just think of it as I'm making another movie. I'm trying to make the best movie I possibly can, and I'm learning a lot. This process has been more similar to the first Guardians for me than anything else because I'm learning so much about how to shoot stuff with Superman, which is very different. You know, the flying and figuring all that out and figuring out the simplicity and elegance of this character, which is so different from anyone I've ever written a movie for before. I'm learning a lot along the way. Great answer. I've said before, I said this last week with the Rolling Stone piece, he's saying all the right things. He really is. He's saying all the right things. And, you know, again, to understand on his level that Superman's going to be different than Guardians of the Galaxy, to compare it to the first Guardians in that he's getting his feet wet and figuring out exactly how to do this character, how to shoot this character, how to write this character, that to me is encouraging. Very encouraging in terms of what we're going to see in 17 days with respect to Superman. So then Entertainment Weekly says there was a situation on social media where people thought David flying was a CG superimposed thing. Was that telling when you talk about having to figure out how to pull off these mechanics of getting David to fly authentically? And he says, no, I don't think it was so much. It was a TV commercial and it wasn't a finished visual effects shot. So the part of him flying, it was a photograph of his face and him flying. It was a photograph of a drone flying in front of an actual background. So all the pieces were real, but it was incorporated in kind of a funky way. I didn't love the shot, so it's not even the shot that's in the movie. Sometimes I'm pretty strict about when I'm going through a trailer and looking at each of the shots, but sometimes the commercials I forget to look at this closely. So that one kind of got by me. So I'm guessing this is the one that everybody talked about. His eyes looked a little off, where, you know, it's just the front facing, you know, like the bullet head, for lack of a better way to put it, that particular shot. Yeah, I think I've also seen a still of what the actual shot of that is going to be, and it does look better in that regard. I think it's still the same like perspective in terms of how he's flying, but it does look like a better shot in that regard. So intriguing with respect to that, and that's going to be a big thing that he's definitely going to get, you know, like, you know, like marked on, if you will, by fans is like, how is the flying? How believable is it? What does it look like? What are his mechanics with respect to that? So that's going to be intriguing to look at as well. Next, they asked him, you titled this first phase of the DCU as Gods and Monsters. How much of Superman is really crucial to that overarching story that you're thinking of telling across all these films and TV shows? Gunn says, oh, it is very important. I wouldn't say Creature Commandos is important, but Peacemaker and Superman are both pretty important in terms of getting to the bigger story. At the same time, he says, I am really trying to be careful that anybody can dip in and see the story that is up next and not feel like they're missing information. The other stories can provide added texture to what you're watching. That might change down the line as we get deeper into what's happening in this universe. It could be like Infinity War and Endgame, where you kind of have to see Infinity War to know what's going on in Endgame. But right now, I'm trying to keep it so that you don't have to see Superman to see Supergirl, for example. Even though there's a lot of stuff in Superman that leads to Peacemaker, you certainly don't need to see it to see Peacemaker. It's just good if you have. But we also say previously in the DCU before every episode, so the TV stuff's pretty easy. Okay, so that's cool, and that's interesting. So that's going to extend like within films or whatnot. So when we start Peacemaker season 2, we're going to see it previously in the DCU. That's cool. I do like that. I like that idea quite a bit. And look, James Gunn is familiar with the MCU structure and the homework problem, our conversation on the homework problem really has changed over the last number of years, truthfully. But it can still be daunting for someone in the general audience to look at the MCU and go, wow, they're 36 movies in. How could I even remotely, where do I even begin if I even wanted to talk about liking any of this stuff? And James Gunn, I think, is from a marketing standpoint, from a creative standpoint, is trying to stave that off as best as he can. Now, looking ahead, if the DCU does succeed and, narratively, he could find himself in a Infinity War to Endgame situation. But, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And that, to me, that's just normal sequel logic, right? That's just normal, especially if you end one on a cliffhanger. And these are hardly the only franchises to have done that. Pirates of the Caribbean did it, Matrix did it. A number of other franchises have done that, where they cut a movie off like at the beginning of the end of one movie, and then the sequel picks up later, and it's a continuation of the story. So it's like, well, you really needed to see this part one before seeing this part two or part three or whatever in that regard. So yeah, I get it. I am intrigued, very intrigued to see how he does it. Next up from Entertainment Weekly, they said something your colleague David Zaslav, head of parent company Warner Brothers Discovery, said around one of these investor calls. He mentioned that Superman, Batman, Supergirl, and Wonder Woman are going to be the core pillars of DC, at least for now. Is that accurate? Gunn says, yeah, I think that's accurate, actually. I think you got that from me. I wouldn't say only those four characters, but I would say that those four characters are incredibly important to us right now. Right now, I feel great about where two of those characters are, and then we're dealing with the other two. And so here we go. He says, or Entertainment Weekly asks, have you cast the other two, Wonder Woman and Batman? And Gunn goes, no. Well, we cast Robert Pattinson, so he is still there, but he's still important. What Matt's doing is still really important, despite all stories to the contrary. We're supposed to see that script shortly, and I can't wait. All right, we're getting into some meat here with respect to the structure of the DC stuff. So he initially says no, and then he remembers Pattinson, right? Because in his brain, I feel like when he answered that, he's like, oh, I know somebody. Like, he's thinking DCU. He's thinking DCU Batman. And then he goes, oh, wait, somebody's going to bring up Pattinson, and they're going to think I'm saying the Batman Part 2's, like, canceled or whatever. So he remembers Robert Pattinson and says, no, that's important, and that's what all that is important in that regard. And yeah, a number of people are up in arms, bothered, irritated, all manner of frustrated because the Batman Epic Crime Saga is seemingly on hold while the DCU launches. And even though I understand it, even though I'm sure many of you understand it, not everybody necessarily understands or agrees with that. So I think that's what guided his answer in that regard. But this next question, they ask him, one of the things that you and Peter emphasized early on is bringing this idea of unity and cohesion across all of these DC titles. But then you also have these Elseworlds titles like Reeves Films and the Penguin series. How do you see both of those things remaining true? And here's Gunn's answer to that. He says, well, it is going to be mostly DCU, and then occasionally there's some Elseworlds tales. There are things that naturally lend themselves to Elseworlds tales. We have a lot of animated projects, and they are sort of a different beast. They aren't all like Creature Commandos. The truth is, the DCU, we give people a lot of freedom to tell different stories. but also we have to be really involved to make sure that, say, the power set of Supergirl and Superman are the same. There's a lot of really silly shit that we have to give notes on in screenplays, like powers or what cities exist in the DCU that don't exist in other places. We aren't the regular world, we're the DCU. There isn't necessarily Seattle, but there's an Evergreen. There isn't necessarily a New York, but there's a Gotham. So all that type of stuff needs to be dialed in. All right, that gives us a bit of a window into the structure of the DCU world, right? And he says, so there's definitely room for people to tell other stories, and when it's somebody who's important, like Matt Reeves, who I've had an admiration for a long time as one of the very, very few filmmakers who's out there making spectacle commercial fare that is also an artist, then you have to stand up and listen, he says. The script still needs to be good. We're not going to make it unless we like the script, but I think that there are exceptions. I told it to one person who came in and pitched something that was an Elseworlds tale. It was a very, very, very famous movie actor. I said, it depends on how the screenplay comes out. If it's a masterpiece, I'll make it, but it has to be a masterpiece. He laughs. And he's like, I don't know if it's a masterpiece. He got all funny. He's still working on it, though. He's still trying to do it. So we'll see. Masterpiece might be pushing it, but it's got to be really great. Okay. That, people were intrigued about the other thing that he's going to bring up in this interview, but that also intrigues me. A very, very, very famous movie actor that pitched him an Elseworlds tale. I wonder who that was. Who could that possibly be? I know that somebody out there is probably already thinking Joe Manganiello's Deathstroke, or wishful thinking, Ben Affleck as Batman, or something to that effect, right? I'm sure that theories have been bandied about on Reddit and social media. I have taken part in none of them. This is the first time I've even thought about this. I am kind of curious. I am kind of curious who that very, very, very famous movie actor is that pitched him an Elseworlds tale. And is it somebody that has been involved in DC or Marvel before? Somebody that's been involved in any of his stuff before? I don't know. It's a great question. Hopefully that script will come together and hopefully it'll get made. I would like to see that happen, whatever it is. I'm very curious about it. But continuing with the rest of Gunn's answer to this, he says, if it's an Elseworlds tale, then it's worth telling something that might tend to confuse a few people. But also part of our thing is really being clear about what is Elseworlds and what is DCU. And the other thing is not just giving away properties like they're party favors to people doing low budget TV shows or stuff that we have no quality control over because we're making a few $1,000s on the rights. It is having some sense of quality control over everything. That really does feel like a producer answer, like a business answer in that regard. However, I see what he means, right? Because there are plenty of people that think that the easiest thing to do is Elseworlds thing that you're not making that I want to see happen. Just sell it to Amazon. Just sell it to Netflix. Just sell it to somebody else and have them do it, and then I can be happy. And it's like, no, it's still their catalog. It's still their pantheon. They still do have that quality control, and I get that. I understand that, right? Because again, very different than the Marvel situation. DC's got its claws. It has retained control of all of its rights, all of its characters, right? It's not something they have to worry about in that regard. So yeah, I understand wanting to keep the quality control on that. That's a very valid point. So let's get into the Clayface stuff here a bit, because of course Tom Rhys Harries was cast as Clayface in the film that Mike Flanagan is going to be writing, which I guess is going to be the third film. They're going to begin that pretty soon here, but they asked him, Peter Safran was telling me a little bit about Clayface and how the hope is to start filming at some point this year, assuming that the script is in this good place. And of course, it says here in the weeks following this interview, Gunn announced that Tom Rhys Harries in the lead role. And Gunn says the new script is great. It's great. I mean, the first script was great, and then this new draft is even better. The movie's definitely getting made, he says. And so they ask him what goes into a decision to bring Clayface into the DCU versus an Elseworlds title. And Gunn's answer is, well, I think it was we just needed DCU content. Mike Flanagan is somebody who I've been friendly with for a long time, and he wrote me about Clayface. He texted me about it really early on in my DC journey. Just being honest, I did not think that was something that was going to happen, but he came in and he pitched the idea, and I was like, oh shit, that's cool. It's a body horror movie. It's a horror movie that, like any cool body horror movie, just happens to be in the DCU. And then he wrote the script, and the script was fantastic. We did not plan to do Clayface. That was really something he brought to us. And right there, Mike Flanagan fans, come on, that's got to wet your whistle. Seriously, that's got to get your attention. It moved, didn't it? Come on, it has to when you hear something like that. And that's the type of stuff, as a fan of the creative journey, like a fan of the creative process, those are the types of stories I like to hear, right? Because we talk about how within the superhero genre, within the comic book movie genre, there are different other genres that can be represented. And here we have Mike Flanagan, who is a master of horror. And I've only seen one of his movies. I've only seen Doctor Sleep. Doctor Sleep was phenomenal. And I would like to see his other work that I'm sure many of you have seen, both, film and television, right? But the idea of he pitches this body horror Clayface story to James Gunn, and Gunn goes, "That's awesome. Let's put it in the DCU." Yes. Yes, 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 yes. More stories like that, more situations like that. Absolutely. Right? That to me is very different than like, okay, Gunn coming up with an idea and then here let's find a director to do this, which I'm sure he can do that as well, but I like that he's open-minded as a creative, if you will, to be able to say, "Oh, hey, my buddy Mike Flanagan came up with this Clayface script. We're going to do this cuz this script is badass," right? Those types of things. Love to see that. Very glad for that. Again, not being that big of a Mike Flanagan fan, I love Doctor Sleep. I want to see his other stuff. I probably will enjoy his other stuff, but yeah, I like hearing that. And then, of course, comes this question. Because this is DCU, is this the same Clayface that we met in Creature Commandos? Gunn's only answer is, I think that everyone will find that out. And this, of course, led to the thing we talked about in Flight Chat, where people were really taking it like literally in terms of this whole idea of if a character is voiced in the animation, then that same actor will play that same character in live action. And Gunn had to clarify that it was primary characters and that sometimes there would be other, considerations where it couldn't necessarily work out that way, plus different versions of characters here and there. Like, it's not as hard and fast of a rule as I think a lot of the fans wanted to hold his feet to the fire to, irrationally, if you will. Because sometimes shit happens as far as scheduling. Okay, Andor season 2, anybody? Bail Organa, anybody? Just throwing that out there. Anyway, next question. Entertainment Weekly asks, in terms of the timeline for the Gods and Monsters phase, Superman is shot and coming out this year. Peacemaker Season 2 coming out this year. Supergirl is wrapped. Oh, it's wrapped? Wow, I didn't know that. Okay, Supergirl is wrapped. Clayface is going to be filmed. What's the next project that's closest to starting principal photography? Gunn says, I'm about to wrap Peacemaker. Peacemaker and Superman are both going to end up being sound mixed and color timed at about the same time in the next 2 weeks. Of course, we now know that Superman, was picture locked. Obviously, we're 17 days away from it. He says we're going to see early episodes of that soon. Lanterns is halfway through filming. Okay, we're going to see early episodes of that soon. Remember, this is back on May 22nd when he was saying this. And then he says, then there's another TV show that's my favorite thing in all of this that is hopefully getting made soon. It's just my favorite thing. And then there's the movie. Oh shit, I don't know what I'm allowed to say or not say, but there's a couple of other movies that are being written, one of which is in pretty good shape, another which is kind of closer to the start, but we feel positive about. And then there's the thing I'm writing, which I think it's okay. So what will be the next thing after Clayface is not 100% certain, but it's pretty certain. Ooh. So think about everything that he just said in that paragraph, right? Like he got excited. At least reading this, it seems like he gets excited. First, he talks about Peacemaker and Lanterns, getting finished. Then he talks about another TV show that's his favorite thing in all of this that's hopefully getting made soon. And then the movie that he's also excited about, right? And then a couple of other movies that are being written, uh, one of which is kind of close to the start, but that they feel positive about. And then another one that he's writing. So let's say I've lost count. That's 4 or 5 things, right? So that's, Peacemaker and Lanterns, of course, you've got that, right? And then another TV show, so that's a TV show, another movie, a couple of other movies, so that's 2 more movies, so that's 4 movies, right, in the show, and then and then the thing that he's writing, whatever that is. So yeah, the plan here is, I mean, it's motoring along, and he seems to have some genuine energy for it. But then, of course, they ask him for clarification. How much of these undisclosed titles are things that have already been announced versus things that haven't? And Gunn says, my favorite thing has not been announced at all. Okay, so not part of the Gods and Monsters announcement. All right. One of the scripts people kind of know about, he says. My script, people don't know about. The other script, people don't know about. So it's mostly stuff people don't know about. A couple of those things, announced in January 2023, are in pretty good shape in terms of coming up. But there was one thing I knew about from the very beginning, that when I pitched to David Zaslav what the DCU would be, I pitched to him but we did not announce in that first meeting because I felt like it was too easy to rip off by another company. And so that's one of the main things. Okay, so just clarifying, a thing that he knew about from the very beginning when he pitched to David Zaslav what the DCU would be, that he pitched to him, but they haven't announced it because he thought it was too easy to rip off by another company. And so that's one of the main things. Another company. Yeah, we know who he's talking about. We know what other company he's more than likely talking about in that regard. And good, James. Safeguard the ideas that you think might get ripped off or latched onto by other companies that you may or may not have previously worked at. All right. So, next question they ask him, is a Superman sequel on your mind? And he says, what I'm working on is in some way, I mean, yes, 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 but is it a straight up Superman sequel? I would say not necessarily. And they ask, is there anything more that you can say about this mystery project that you're writing next? Is this the project that you'll direct next? And he says, well, I always leave saying I'm going to direct something till I'm actually done with the screenplay. And then I say, yeah, I want to do this. But it's probably what I will direct. Yeah, probably, to be totally realistic. Yes, probably. Okay, fair enough. And that's also another project that has not been announced, so we have no idea what it is. Okay. There's some exciting buildup here with respect to the possibilities for the DCU going forward. So then they ask him, for a long time, Guillermo del Toro has wanted to make a Justice League Dark project. Just knowing your sensibilities and what you're into personally in comic books, it felt like this might be up your alley. And Gunn says, and I love Guillermo, and we own a movie theater together. By the way, Guillermo's never said that to me. I hear all these things about Guillermo would love to do Justice League Dark. Well, Guillermo's never said that to me, he says. Just let Steven Spielberg do his Blackhawks movie that he wants to do. Steven Spielberg, who I love above anyone else, he says, has never said that to me. So these things get blown out of proportion. Years and years ago, he says, I said I wanted to make a Thunderbolts movie. I was in a convention somewhere and somebody asked me, what did I want to do that wasn't Guardians of the Galaxy? I said Thunderbolts. And for years and years, it's like, James Gunn should be allowed to make his Thunderbolts movie. I have a million things that I thought I wanted to do in certain moments. And that's a great point because, yeah, the Blackhawks movie that Steven Spielberg was attached to, like, we get excited, right? Because we love Spielberg and we love Del Toro and we're like, they need to do a movie in my favorite universe. And so, yeah, it turns into this thing that we own as fans, right? We take ownership of it even though it never really existed. And he's probably right. Guillermo Del Toro, if anybody pressed him about it or asked him point blank, has he ever actually on the record said, hey, I want to do a Justice League Dark project? I don't know that that's ever, like, has anybody ever thought to ask him that after all these years? I don't know. And Gunn is saying he's never told him that. And he knows Guillermo personally, way more than any of the rest of us do. So, yeah, it is interesting how these things get blown up. And the Thunderbolts thing now is even funnier in terms of he answered that question and it's like, let James Gunn make his Thunderbolts movie. And now what are people saying? People are now saying that Jake Schreier, the Thunderbolts director, should be allowed to do his X-Men movie, even though I don't think he's ever officially said that he wants to do an X-Men movie. I don't think, unless, there's an article or something in there that I haven't caught, but he hasn't been officially announced to X-Men or anything like that. People are speculating and saying, oh, we want this to happen. That's where it takes a life of its own. When fans want to will something to happen that they really want to have go down. And maybe this next project was part of it. This next question, they ask him, I also wanted to ask about Sergeant Rock. With all the information flying out there, could you set the record straight on that in terms of where it is? Gunn's answer, as of May 22nd, was, I feel like we're in a pretty good place. We're still moving forward, but it's not going to be, what would Peter want me to say here? So it's still moving forward, but yeah, right now it wasn't exactly where I wanted it to be creatively, and so it needs to change a little bit. All right, fair enough, because we'd heard recently that Sergeant Rock got axed, got completely canceled. He apparently, as of May 22nd, was saying otherwise with respect to that. And then, of course, they ask him about Paradise Lost. That's the Themyscira Amazon's project with Wonder Woman. Gunn's answer was, Paradise Lost is moving along. It's slow moving, but it's moving. And yeah, I really love that project a lot. Which, again, is not one of the 5 or 6 projects he mentioned earlier, because Paradise Lost was something that was announced in the Gods and Monsters Chapter 1 announcement back in January of 2023. Hard to believe it's been that long since he made that announcement. And so they ask him, is that really directly connected to your larger plans for Wonder Woman in this space? Gunn's answer is yes. Well, yes and no. Wonder Woman's a separate thing. We're working on Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman's being written right now. So it's different. I mean, not different. They're connected. She's from effing Themyscira. So And that's where he leave the answer. That's where he leaves the answer, rather. And so it's like, okay, Wonder Woman is being written now, but is that one of the projects? No, maybe it is, or maybe it isn't one of the projects he's excited about that he wasn't sure what he could say about. But he at least did. He said it by name, so maybe it's not a secret, and understandably so, because again, it's the Trinity in that regard. So yeah, it doesn't need to necessarily retain that to secrecy. I don't think that they're developing a Wonder Woman movie. But here we go. This next one. They ask, also, a lot of people I'm sure are blowing you up on social media, probably in person too, about the state of the Batman Part 2. And here's Gunn's answer that got a lot of people in their feelings in a variety of ways. He says, listen, we're supposed to get a script in June. I hope that happens. We feel really good about it. Matt's excited. I talk to Matt all the time. I'm totally excited about it. So we can't wait to read the scripts, but we haven't read it yet, if that's your question. People should get off Matt's nuts because it's like, let the guy write the screenplay in the amount of time he needs to write it. That's just the way it is. He doesn't owe you something because you like his movie. I mean, you like his movie because of Matt, so let Matt do things the way he does. And so this continues forwarding the idea that the script isn't done, which not everybody believes that's the case, but the idea that it isn't done and that Matt Reeves is taking his time to write it. So that's the official line. That's officially how James Gunn is treating this, and it is what it is. Again, like I said, as a Batman fan, I can be completely patient. I don't need the immediacy of the Batman Part 2 to happen in with respect to everything else going on in the DCU. But they also ask, they say it sort of relates to one of the first questions I asked you, which is your relationship to social media. I can't imagine being in Matt's position, having to write a script while also being hounded on social media for updates. Gunn says, well, I don't think Matt really pays attention to that stuff so much. He's got a lot of other things happening, so I don't think he lets it affect him. He's fine. But I am irritated by people. I mean, it's just that thing people don't need to be entitled about. It's going to come out when he feels good about the screenplay, and Matt's not going to give me the screenplay until he feels good about the screenplay. And again, with respect to that answer, there are people out there that don't buy that answer. There are people out there that don't believe him. There are people out there that think he's stalling and basically holding Matt Reeves' Batman movie at bay while the DCU gets kicked off. There are people that believe that, and then there are others that totally believe that the script isn't done and are willing to buy what Gunn is absolutely putting forth here. And I think we have to take him at his word, right? This is what he's saying officially on the docket. He's the co-head of DC Studios, so far be it for me or anybody else to necessarily call him a liar. I mean, you can if you want to, I suppose, but I got to go with what his official story is. And unless Matt Reeves comes out and says, that's a lie, my script's been done for months and da 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 da, right? He's just waiting for Superman. Unless that's the case, right? Unless that actually happens, then I got to take it at face value and not necessarily go with the conjecture in that regard. But again, as I've said, Batman fan with a shelf of Batman content, Batman cinematic domination for decades. I can take a back seat to him for a bit, wait patiently while Superman and everything else in the DCU gets kicked off. As far as I'm concerned, that's how I personally feel about it. And I think that the social media fervor and all the attention for it, fan entitlement, of course, right? Because there is a degree of anticipation. There are people out there that would rather see the Batman Part 2 than Superman. And part of that has to do with not liking James Gunn's style of direction. I think he's just going to, make Superman a bunch of, low rent humor jokes and silliness and don't really dig Gunn's style in that regard, right? For whatever reason, there's those people. And then there are people that just like Batman more than Superman and couldn't care less about Superman. And, this movie's not going to change their mind necessarily because they're set in their ways and they're stubborn. So they're just waiting for the Batman Part 2 for the next film that they're going to get excited about. And it's like, well, that couldn't be me. Batman is my favorite superhero of all time, but he's had so many movies, he's had so much cinematic dominance. I can sit back and I can wait and see. I can give Kal-El, the last son of Krypton, the time of day. Because how many of his solo movies have we seen in the last 20 some odd years? Two: Superman Returns and Man of Steel. That is it. That is it for solo Superman movies since 2006. Undamn acceptable for a member of the Trinity, for one of the bigger members of the Trinity. I feel like the hierarchy of the Trinity as far as popularity is Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman in that order. They're all the Trinity. They're all very popular. And you know that how the Patty Jenkins' first Wonder Woman movie did is definitely an impetus and energizing for them to get another Wonder Woman movie in the DCU off the ground. Most certainly. No question about it. But, I mean, Superman has not had his time in the sun the same way that Batman has. Batman has had 6 different actors since 1989. 8 films, right? 8 solo movies and 12 total film appearances, counting the DCEU, right? 3 appearances in the DCEU outside of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, okay? Justice League, The Flash, and Suicide Squad, right? Like, it's just, Batman has had his time. Batman has had his day. Batman will have his day again. But let's get Superman's house in order. Let's get everything else cracking. Let's give all the Superman fans a chance to be happy and excited. I'm perfectly okay with that. That's why I'm not bugging either James Gunn or Matt Reeves, who he's not on social media very much. I can't imagine his Twitter presence like got bigger after I left that particular hell site. But either way, they'll get to it at some point. The DCU's got to get started first, and so then we come to the end of it. It says one last question: are there other characters who will appear in Superman who have not been announced yet? One word answer: yes. And that's it for the interview. That's it with respect to the Entertainment Weekly piece. So definitely a much shorter and a lot less introspective than the Rolling Stone piece. But we got some tidbits out there. I mean, it sounds like they got a lot of projects in the hopper. And look, so much of this is riding on getting a good start. We know that Superman obviously is out in 17 days. We know that Supergirl is happening. We know that Lanterns is happening. He's confident that Clayface is happening, right? So we've got a beginning here for the DCU in terms of these films that he is confident is going to happen. And then based on the strength of that, that will determine how many more projects that are being written, how many more projects that they brought writers in for, get developed down the road. But it sounds like they got a plan. It sounds like they've got some organization. It sounds like he knows creatively what he wants to do and where he wants to go with this franchise. And is just yet another thing that we've been hoping and wishing and praying for DC cinematically in that regard. We wanted DC Films to come up with a cohesive plan for a long time. Never happened. Never went the way that it was really supposed to, the way that we hoped it would. And now it looks like James Gunn, at least from what he's telling us, from the words coming out of his mouth that he's telling these interviewers on this press junket for Superman, he's telling us, yeah, I've got a plan. I've got a plan, and I am letting our creatives flow on this, and we're gonna get it going. And that, as anybody that is a fan of creatives, especially if they take charge of the creative nature of your favorite franchise, your favorite comic book franchise, in that regard, like that should be reassuring. That should be something where you take a bit of a deep breath and go, ah, all right. And I feel like there will be some, maybe not all, but there will be some people, some fans out there that are very trepidatious of James Gunn, helming the DCU, that will breathe a sigh of relief after they see Superman. I'm sure there'll be those that'll be like, oh, it's going to go to hell in a handbasket, because they'll find some nitpicky schlock to harp on with respect to Superman. I will not. As I've said before, I'm going to like the movie. It's just a question of how much am I going to like the movie. And you know what? If all the genuine stuff I'm seeing here in these interviews and these press junkets and whatnot, if all of that speaks to the heart of the movie, then I'm going to enjoy the hell out of it and, maybe see it multiple times at the theater. But we will see. 17 days away, and more introspective stuff and more press stuff to come for sure, no doubt about it, as we move closer and closer to Superman's release date. So a few other things I wanted to mention about James Gunn's responses on Threads with respect to questions. He was in another one of those moments where he was responding to a lot of questions on social media, on Threads. He brings up Threads because maybe he's the most active on Threads. He was asked specifically with respect to the Warner Brothers intro, and also with respect to Miss Tessmacher. The Miss Tessmacher question, I think, was probably the more relieving for people like me, and certainly Phil Barker, who had a very explicit response that he was happy. And what he was asked if Lex Luthor was going to scream Miss Tessmacher, like Gene Hackman's signature Miss Tessmacher scream, blood curdling in Superman in 1978, Superman the movie in 1978, and that was also parodied by Callista Flockhart's Cat Grant in season 2 of Supergirl, and was actually said by John Cryer's Lex Luthor in season 4 of Supergirl. Not nearly as great as Hackman's original version, but yeah. The answer, one word from James Gunn, was nope, not going to happen. And I'm happy of that. I said good. He doesn't need to. Nicholas Holt's Lex should be his own version, not a clone of Gene Hackman. We don't need to rehash. We don't need to do that. Not at all. And of course, a random bot troll with one follower said, "I won't lie, I thought this moment was him screaming that line." There's the part in one of the trailers where Lex is clearly like screaming. He's got the veins popping out of his head, and it's like, really? You thought that was him saying Miss Tessmacher? Okay, that's why you're a bot, right? Just, I mean, these bots, they just like to stoke the fire and really like get everybody's, riled up about something stupid most of the time, just for the sake of what? Engagement, attention, steering the conversation. I don't know. The other one that he responded to, the other question he responded to me, that is certainly more critical in terms of in an organizational sense, where he was asked by a Threads account by the name of S Sigma Boy 69. And this was a picture of a Warner Brothers picture logo that I don't think this is a new logo at all, but this guy asked, "Hey, sir, at James Gunn, did we get new design intro Warner Brothers for Superman?" And Gunn's response was, "There is no WB intro. It's a DC Studios film." One more time. There is no WB intro. It's a DC Studios film. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Mainline that into my veins forever. Yes. Absolutely. Is there a Disney logo at the beginning of Marvel Studios movies? No, there is not. This is the world healing, at least on a first world level. I know there's a whole bunch of other horrible shit happening in the world, but at least on a first world level, at least with respect to my movies, TV, and other sort of media, I've got this. I can hang on to this. I can enjoy that. We're going to get a DC Studios logo and a DC Studios animation, and nothing with rinky-dink Warner Brothers. This is not a Warner Brothers division. It's not a rinky-dink division. It's DC Studios autonomous by itself. A DC Studios logo, not a WB logo. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. If there is no other reason that I'm rooting for the success of the DCU and DC Studios, it's that. It's for that reason. It's for DC to be its own autonomous entity. Finally, it is here. Finally, I get to enjoy it, and in 17 days, I'm going to sit in that theater with Shonda, and we're going to enjoy the hell out of that. I'm going to enjoy the hell out of that. If nothing else, like I said, I know I'm going to like the movie, but I'm really going to love that. I'm really, really going to love that. I cannot get enough of DC Studios existing as an autonomous entity by its damn self. I don't care that it's owned by Warner Bros. Discovery. I don't care that it's like part of an ownership group. No, DC Studios is DC Studios. It's not DC Films. It's DC Studios. I wanted this. You all know I wanted this for years, and I'm finally getting it. Finally, it's finally happening. Yes. All right. Fantastic. That's a great note to end out on. That'll do it for this week's episode of the Flightcast. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for supporting the Flightcast Podcast Network. If you have any thoughts with respect to yet another James Gunn interview, this time talking more about the DC Studios organizational stuff, or any of the stuff that he brought up as far as there not being a WB logo and just being a DC Studios logo, or the fact that we're not going to hear the Tessmacher scream and all that whatnot. If you have any thoughts with respect to that, or anything else with respect to movies, TV, and other sorted media as we inch closer to the big July. We can call it the big July, right? Because, like I said, it's not just Superman on July 11th. It's also Jurassic World Rebirth on July 2nd. And Fantastic Four First Steps on July 25th. If you have any thoughts on any of that, you know where to find me on Threads and Instagram at The Flightcast, on BLUESKY at Flightcast. You can comment on the posting for this episode of the Flightcast YouTube page. There's the Flightcast Facebook page. And, of course, I can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. All right, take care, stay safe out there, have a great rest of the week, and I will see you all next time. Take it easy.